couldn't wait for you to come and clear the cupboards. But now you're gone and leaving nothing but a sign. Another evening I'll be sitting reading in between your lines, because I miss you all the time. So get away, another way to feel what you do on yourself to know and let yourself go. You know you do lose your self-control. The snow with the rainbow. Turn away, another way to be where you do let yourself go, let yourself go. Is that nice? So what do you wanna do? What's your point of view? There's no place here. Do you wanna get out of handshake with you? What's your point of view? I want sort for you. I don't wanna get, 'cause I really wanna stay at your house and balance it like something. But you know how much you brought me all undone. You were ignoring you. I don't wanna know. And I'm aware that you were lying in the gutter, 'cause I did everything to be there by your side. So when you tell me I'm the reason, I just can't believe the lies. And why do I so wanna call you? So what do you wanna do? What's your point of view? There's no place here. Do you wanna get out of handshake with you? What's your point of view? I want sort for you. I don't wanna get, 'cause I really wanna stay at your house and balance it like something. But you know how much you brought me all undone. You were ignoring you. I don't wanna know.
This is one of the few topics that I know almost nothing at all about, and it's a pretty heavy topic, and it's an important topic. And thankfully, we have an expert to go through it with us. Let's get into it. He has a plan, she has a plan, and you get to pay for it regardless.
The best way to get someone motivated is to stand for something strongly, deeply, passionately.
Subscribe to Disenthrall.
Do as you're told.
Welcome back to Disenthrall. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be Patrick Smith. Our expert, our special guest today is none other than the Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist, author. He has a weekly podcast on YouTube. The channel is named 3 Minute Therapy. He's a Psychology Today blogger with a moniker, The 3 Minute Therapist. He was awarded Author of the Year for his book, 3 Minute Therapy, which I have on the shelf behind me. And we've actually read like half of on this channel if you go search for the videos. He treats clients regularly on Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, and phone. Dr. Edelstein specializes in anxiety, depression, anger, relationship problems, and addictions. His website is 3minutetherapy.com. Sir, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah, this is the second or third time I've spoken with you. The first time we went into why Ayn Rand was dead wrong about self-esteem, and that was a fascinating conversation, and you were convincing. I think by the end of it, you won me over for sure. I liked our talk very much. I also like your therapy model, and I mean, that means nothing coming from a layman, I suppose, but it makes a lot of sense, and it approaches things from a lot of the same perspectives that we have as sort of moral agents in the liberty space, like where we take responsibility for our own existence, our own reactions, our own thoughts. And that kind of leads us directly into this conversation. So if it's cool, I guess I'll just, I know less how to navigate this conversation than almost any other conversation I've had on this channel. So let me just give you some context for my background and why I wanted to talk to you about this, and then hear your thoughts, and we can just go wherever we want to go. And of course, anyone watching in the comments, please, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you have comments, this show, almost more than any other show I do, please give me your feedback and your questions and help direct this chat. Okay, context. I'm 40 something, 43 something, 44. I don't know how old I am anymore. I guess I've hit the age where I stopped knowing how old I am. And I think if I thought before the show, I counted back all the times in my life in which I had encountered someone I knew that was either considering, had considered, or attempted and was successful suicide. And it was 10, which feels like a lot. I don't know if most people have that many encounters with people in their relationships that have that. But whether or not that's a lot, I don't know, but it's happened enough that I've gotten to know myself around being adjacent to a person in that situation. And every time it happens, I don't seem to react like normal people. And I don't know why. And maybe I'm broken. Maybe. That's always a possibility. But I get extremely frustrated, somewhat angry, and very impatient. And I don't know why. And I also don't understand, and this is why. Because I don't understand the justification or the reasoning or the headspace or the mind space someone is at when they're thinking of or attempting to do that stuff. And so it's been very difficult for me to navigate relationships with people in the past that have talked about or attempted this stuff, because I react very like, tough up, man. This is life. Life includes suffering. You know, it's not for everybody. You're tough enough. Grab those bootstraps and let's go. And I know that's probably not the appropriate thing to say. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but so I tend to be left in a quandary. So I guess obviously most of the times when I've encountered this, it's been people merely considering it and they reach out and want to talk to me about it. Then there's been 2 times where somebody I knew attempted it and was unsuccessful. And then 1 time somebody that I worked with actually did it. And so I've kind of experienced the entire spectrum, and I'm just kind of at a loss. And with it, as insane as the world has been, this is the last thing, and then I'll shut up. For the past 3 years, it seems to be like half of my 10 or so experiences with this topic have been in the last several years. And that says something to me. Either, I mean, I don't know, I could be projecting reasoning on it, but certainly this pandemic, certainly the fascism implemented by the governments around the world have exacerbated whatever problem is there or made things worse. But I thought that this show would be timely, maybe even a year late, probably a year late. So what are your thoughts?
Well, you said, Patrick, when you confront people who are considering suicide, you're at a loss. So that implies you have some goal or objective in the conversation that you're at a loss to implement. So what would be your goal or your objective?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna collectivize a bunch of experiences. And in case anybody that I'm thinking of is watching right now, don't take it personally. I'm collectivizing, because there are several. I don't know that I have a goal. With some of them, it was being supportive, trying to be what a friend should be in that relationship in that time. But it's impossible for me to sympathize so far. hopefully, and it's difficult for me to empathize. So I'm just at a loss on how to be a good friend in that situation. And then the frustration and sort of anger prevents me from even wanting to fix it. It's like, come on, like I've been through a lot of tough stuff. You might not know my story. My daughter had leukemia. We fought that battle for years. It was some of the hardest stuff I've ever witnessed and been a part of. And that's part of life. That's part of existence. And every day when we wake up and we attack existence, it's kind of that. It's like you have a choice to fight the fight and continue to exist or give up. And if I can deal with all the stuff that I've dealt with, then surely other people can. And so from that, I just get annoyed. I don't know. So I don't know. I have a lot of I don't knows. That's why I wanted to talk to you.
Yeah. So let me explain some of the principles that I use with my clients, and maybe some will ring a bell in talking to people you meet in the future who are very depressed or suicidal, contemplating suicide. And the first principle that is, I think, the greatest misconception people have about life and our existence and emotions is that our emotions, like depression, don't come from situations themselves, but our emotions come from our thinking about situations. And if you listen to people talk, they always lay their emotions on situations. I'm depressed because I just got fired. So in other words, getting fired caused me to be depressed. Or I'm anxious because I have a big event coming up. In other words, a big event is causing you to be anxious. But that's not how we work psychologically. That's the intuitive view, but it's not how we work psychologically. The way we work psychologically is that it's never these situations that causes our emotions, anxiety, depression, suicide, contemplation, but rather it's our thinking about that. And that's a very powerful concept, because if you're emotionally disturbed and you don't want to be emotionally disturbed, you don't have to change the situation that you find yourself in, but it means identifying the thinking that's causing your disturbance and changing that. And that's the good news. You can change your emotions by changing your thinking. And there's particular kind of thinking that leads to emotional disturbance, like anger, anxiety, depression, guilt. And that's thinking in terms of demands. And there are three main demands people have in their life. The first is a demand on oneself, and that takes the form of, because I strongly prefer to do well and get approval, therefore I absolutely must. I have to. And if I do poorly or people criticize me or hate me, that is awful and I can't stand it and I'm a loser. So the structure here is you take your strong preferences and escalate them into demands. The second area of emotional disturbance is anger, hostility, resentment, and it's a demand not on oneself, but a demand on others. And it takes the same form, because I prefer you treat me well, fairly, kindly, reasonably, rationally. Therefore, you absolutely must. And if you don't, then you're no good. You're a rotten person. You deserve to roast your hell in hell, and I'll roast you. I've just appointed myself your roaster, and that's my anger. And then the third area of demands and disturbance is an impersonal context of demands, not on people, oneself or others, but on the conditions of one's life. Because I strongly prefer my life to be fair, easy, and hassle-free, therefore it must be. And if it's not the way it must be, that's awful, that's terrible, and I'll be miserable forever. And that third must often leads to Great Depression and suicide. And suicide to escape the awful circumstances of your life that you've decided are intolerable. So those are the three musts, and I defy anyone to cite an emotional disturbance that doesn't follow from one of those three musts.
That definitely.
Patrick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yo, Patrick, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of bungee in and cherry pick a couple of the ones that you talked about. The second one was included an element of resentment, and I think that's been a big justification for a lot of disturbances, as you would say. Let me know if I'm using the language wrong. Over the past several years, because many people's lives have been destroyed by government intervention justified by COVID, and they are justly, with righteous indignation, are resentful of their losses, their lost business, their lost income, their lost freedom. Maybe they even lost opportunities to visit loved ones that were sick because they weren't allowed in the room with them. The lost ability to travel. Maybe they missed something of vital importance to them. And there was, and just to say, and I just wanted to call out and see what you had to say about that resentment, because some of the resentment is sort of justified, from a Stoic point of view, you want to also keep your mind in alignment with reality. And the reality is there's this massive coercive institution called government out there. And to expect that government to do anything other than to interfere in your personal life, business life, and travel on a constant basis is to be out of alignment with reality. So it's almost like we should, if we expect that, maybe we wouldn't be so resentful. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me tackle, you said a number of things that I'd like to address. Let me tackle the last one first about Stoicism. Stoicism talks about the dichotomy of control. There are things you control in your life and things you don't control. And when you identify the things you don't control, like what the government is doing to you, then the correct way to deal with that is to accept this is a reality right now. And acceptance doesn't mean you like it, you go along with it, you lie down and become a doormat. Acceptance just means you acknowledge this is the way it is, and you acknowledge that you don't like it, and you also include, I wish I could do something about it, let's see what I can do. But upsetting myself, getting myself resentful about this doesn't help. It doesn't change anything except eats me up inside. So when someone feels resentful or angry about injustice, my first question to them is, how does that help? And the answer is, it doesn't. It just makes them feel worse. It's bad enough that the government is victimizing them. Now they're victimizing themselves about the government victimizing them. So they have two problems for the price of one, which does no good.
So the appropriate response, I mean, like when we talk about the Stoics, it's not that the Stoics never got sort of righteously indignant or angry at an aggressor. It's just that they set their expectations such that anger wasn't like all-consuming or a second problem that you're inflicting on yourself, like you just described, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't read about Stoics getting angry, but you could be right about that. But yeah, set your expectations in line with reality. Whatever is, and it's not going to change it because you're throwing a temper tantrum. And then what can you do to change it, if anything? So take effective action, but upsetting yourself, disturbing yourself, making yourself into an emotional basket case is not an effective action. So therefore, look at your thinking that's causing that, thinking in terms of these demands, must, should, supposed to's, have to's, reinforce your passionate preferences to work hard to try to change things and try to live your own life unencumbered by the state. But certainly upsetting yourself is the last thing to do in order to help yourself or help anyone else.
So if you find yourself caught in a feedback loop of, I don't know, anger at reality, whatever's happened, or resentful of government intrusion, or actually, there's another category. Well, and I guess this would fit in your third category. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. There was more than three. This probably fits in your three. It's sort of like an existential, state of the world depression. Like, what's the point of it all? There's so much evil. There's so much bad. There's so much harm. There's so many obstacles in the way. I'm trying to play various characters to try and get your thoughts on it. What would you say to that kind of depression?
The point of it all is to enjoy life. That's the point of it all. To enjoy life, and in order to enjoy life, decide on goals. Like your goal could be live outside the state if possible. So figure out how to do that, or influence the state if possible, or especially learn how not to disturb yourself about the state, because that's not helping. So to get back to your question, the point of it all is to enjoy yourself, get satisfaction from your life, feel fulfilled to the extent you can by having goals, passions, and working toward them. And in the discussion you and I, Patrick, had before we started, you told me about some of your passionate goals, which sounded very good. And that helps you enjoy life, work towards something, and rather than just disturbing yourself about things.
So don't, I mean, it sounds like such an adage, but it's an adage probably because it's true. Don't upset yourself over things you have no power to control. Find the things that you can control, set goals that you can control, and then work towards those. Focus on that instead.
Yeah, exactly. But don't upset yourself about things you don't control. There's a lot in there. And that's what I do as a psychotherapist. And that's why I'm in business, because people all the time upset themselves over things they don't control, and they don't know how not to. So I teach them how not to. I teach my clients to be their own therapists, to identify their unreasonable, unrealistic, irrational thinking that causes their upset, and I showed them how to change it. And the main way to change your thinking, if you think that the government should not intrude, must not intrude, it's the end of the world because the government's intruding, the method is to question, challenge, and contradict those musts. Musts are always fictions. There's no must that is in accord with reality. Because, as I said, reality is reality, not the way you think it should be. So in order to be unupset, get your thinking in line with reality, like the Stoics advise.
Yeah, it's important to have, a moral philosophy backing your principles. It's important to live by principles. And it's also important to recognize that the world is most likely completely out of alignment with whatever principles that you're having, especially if you're a libertarian. And right. Coming to terms with that, living life in spite of that, maybe in spite of is the wrong word. Living life anyway, enjoying life anyway. Realizing that in the arc of history, we have it pretty damn good, all things considered. Those kind of perspectives. Okay, so
exactly.
Can we go ahead?
By the way, Murray Rothbard was a great example of this. He saw the humor. He knew better than anyone, probably, the depredations of the state. Yet he just saw the humor in it. He didn't upset himself about it. He saw the humor in it and wrote books and gave talks and did what he could to change it, but refused to upset himself. And that's a good role model.
What would you say to a guy like me? What am I missing that's preventing me from empathizing sufficiently with somebody in this space? Part one. Part two is, what should I do to be of assistance to somebody in that headspace?
Well, in order to empathize, the first step is to give up your demands that he be otherwise, accept the fact he is the way he is. That's his choice. He could do better, but he's not right now. And then think of a time when you got upset, and you mentioned earlier about being resentful, and even saying you thought resentment is justified. I hope you've changed your mind about that. So think of times that you've been upset and how it felt, which was bad. And then you could understand to some extent how these people feel when they're upset. So that might help you empathize. And in terms of assisting them and helping them, I think the best approach is to ask them, is there any way I could be of help? Because different people would have different answers, and there's no reason you would know right off what works best for them. So someone might say, just listen. Someone else might say, let's talk about something more enjoyable. Someone else might say, tell me how you feel in this situation. So different people have different ways to be assisted. You could refer them to my book, 3-Minute Therapy, which you see right here, which goes into this in great detail, goes into this approach. And I also have a website, Patrick, called 3minutetherapy.com, the name of my book. 3 is spelled out, as you can see on your screen there. And that goes into great detail how you can apply these principles to a whole variety of problems: anger, depression, anxiety, stress, social phobia, panic attacks, and others, relationship problems. So you can become an expert in emotions and learn how you can change your emotions and help other people to change their emotions, and assist in that way if they want that assistance.
We definitely did a read through of a portion, maybe a third of your book, 3-Minute Therapy, on our second channel. The second channel, for those looking for that, is called Disenthrall 2, TOO. And those videos all have an Amazon link, I believe, to purchase his book. So if you're looking for that, definitely go check that out on our other Disenthrall channel. And it's very topical, right? So you can turn straight to the chapter addressing the area that you're thinking about. We have a question from a supporter of the channel. Phobes is asking, and I think I see the misunderstanding, but I'll put it to you and you can explain. He says, what if they're not demands, and more to the point, not demands being made of me? The lockdowns are what I'm talking about. He was never directly targeted by the state, but 75 to 90% of his clients were. And the same applies to a bunch of other business owners that he communicates with. I think, well, I'll put it to you. I think he misunderstands who's doing the demanding in the way that you're talking about it.
That's right. I'm talking about people making these demands of themselves in their own head, which leads to problems. Someone might demand, or the government might demand, you pay your income taxes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the demands on yourself, such as, I must not be burdened by unfair, unjust income taxes. This is awful, terrible, and horrible. I might as well lie down and die, and getting depressed over that. That's the kind of demands I'm referring to.
But isn't that a just, sort of valid, righteous demand? Like, I have a right to not be stolen from every year on, April 15th. Like, I demand that you stop.
Yeah, but that's a legal right. Yeah, you have a legal right not to be stolen from. But I'm not talking about legal rights. I'm talking about emotional demands. And emotional demands are a different category. Emotional demands are things you put on yourself from your demanding thinking and leads to your emotional disturbance.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess I can just restate it in emotional terms. Isn't it an emotionally valid demand that you be left alone and for example, not have your business shut down by COVID? Like,
Well,
aren't you
where does
right?
that get you? Where does that demand get you? If it's a right demand or a correct demand, then presumably it would help you in your life. But as far as I can tell, when people make those demands on themselves, it does the opposite of helping them. It leads them to feel angry, resentful, hostile, homicidal, those kinds of things.
Let me ask it in reverse.
Yeah.
When is it appropriate to feel angry and hostile and resentful?
Good question. Good question. And in my book, 3 Minute Therapy, on the chapter on anger, I say it's never appropriate to make yourself angry because all it does is eat you up inside. It's appropriate to work hard, passionately against the injustice you're making yourself angry about. That's appropriate, but not anger. Anger just eats you up inside. Harry Emerson Fosdick, a cleric around 1900, said, "Anger is like burning down your house to get rid of a rat." And I think that's a great description of it.
I love that every time you talk about an emotion, you say make yourself feel, because that is a constant reminder of who is in charge of these damn emotion things. And I think
Great, yeah.
if there's one message the world needs, that's definitely up high on the list. Like, you are in charge of your, especially anyone under 25 that's been brought up in whatever this modern whatever it is, they need to be told you are in control of your emotions. You determine how you feel. You have the capacity to select how you feel and to control how you're feeling. And
yes, I think that's a great point, Patrick. I think a big problem with wokeism is people blaming other people for their emotions. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind, which means when people insult you or treat you poorly, you are helpless. You have nothing, you can't do anything except go to a safe zone and it's a microaggression where these people can't hurt you. Well, the news is they can't hurt you emotionally. They can't hurt you by calling you names or saying you're a girl when you want to be a boy or things like that. That's up to you to disturb yourself about that.
We have a question, and this is a good question, because I know 3 people in my life that suffer from chronic physical pain. The question is, this person suffers from chronic physical pain in the body with no pain relief working adequately. I think of ending it every day, they say. What's my solution if I can't escape my body tormenting me? Now, let me test my understanding of your advice, and you can grade me. You would say that you have a demand on life that you should not feel pain. And I think I feel like I'm failing my test. And yeah, I don't know. You correct your demand. I don't know. Realize the truth of the situation. I failed. I give up. I'm crying uncle.
No, I don't think you failed. I think you did passably. I'll give you a B- on that.
Oh wow. Okay. You're being generous.
So I have a concept called the problem separation technique, and that is, as we go through life, we have various practical problems, like pain. It's a practical problem. But then, being imperfect humans, we often escalate the practical problem into an emotional problem by getting ourselves disturbed about that, or suicidal about that, or depressed about that. So this person with a lot of pain has a practical problem. And then the question is, what's the best way to deal with it? And maybe the best way to deal with it is suicide. And then he'll have no pain. That's his choice. But if he's then upsetting himself about it, which your response assumed, and if that's the case, if he's upsetting about it, then he has a demand. That's why you didn't get an F, Patrick, because you're right. If he was disturbing himself about the pain, then he could do something about that, the disturbance, not the pain. Although sometimes if you're disturbing yourself about the pain, I must not have this pain, I must not have this pain, I must not have this pain, then that leads you to dwell on the pain and magnify it and feel it worse. So I'm not saying that this person is doing that, but if he is, then he has a demand and he can change that. Does that answer the question, do you think, Patrick?
I can empathize much more easily with a pain-based depression because people close to me live with it. And it must feel incredibly unjust to have their life and capacity to, I don't know, be a good parent, be a good spouse, be adequate at their job or whatever task they want to accomplish, just have that constantly interfered with and destroyed. It's not fair. It's not right. And that is the demand part that you're probably you're talking about getting layered on the reality of the pain, right?
If you say it must be fair, no, you could say it is unfair. It is unjust. Most people aren't walking through every day with pain. So in that sense, we can make a case it's unfair. The emotional problem comes in when you say it must not be unfair. Life must be fair. As I said earlier with the third must, life should be fair, easy, and hassle-free for me. So that's where the emotional problem comes in. So distinguish between the practical problem, in this case, the pain, and then the emotional problem, if you have one. You may not. I have a couple of friends who deal with pain every day, and they do okay with it because they're not creating an emotional problem about the practical problem. So it's important to make that distinction. Does that make sense in terms of the problem separation technique, practical problem versus emotional problem?
I get the second part with being angry at the state of reality. That makes sense. I understand trying to figure out how to either accept reality, or I don't know. What was the other part of that? So what's the other part of the problem separation? Like, okay, let's say that we've accepted reality and the cost benefit just isn't there. Like, what?
Yeah, the other part is what you're going to do about it. The first part is acceptance, and the second part is what are you going to do about it.
Okay.
So, and that's up to you, your values, what's important to you, the context of your life. So a lot of this is an individual decision when you're not disturbing yourself.
I'm reading a bunch of comments. Some people are disagreeing, and I'm trying to summarize them and hand them to you so that we can talk about it.
Great.
So maybe here's the strongest opposition that I see to what you're saying. Quote,
No.
I understand petty little first world problems. People need to nut the F up, but that's not what I'm talking about. Imagine telling the Jews to control their anger and just figure it out. I think he's referring to the Holocaust, obviously. So maybe if you address that Steelmanist most just reason for righteous anger, that we could imagine, what advice? I mean, I assume your advice would be exactly the same, right?
No, well, that's a misunderstanding. The viewer misunderstands what I'm saying. My first thing I said, one of the earlier things I said to you, Patrick, when you want to help someone, ask them if they want help. I wouldn't tell the Jews to shape up about the problem if they didn't want my help with their emotions. If they did, then if they did ask me, then I would teach them some of these principles. By the way, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who wrote a number of books. The most famous one was Man's Search for Meaning. And he was in a Nazi concentration camp. And people were mainly depressed, very, very depressed. And he helped them by teaching them a different way to think about it, by teaching them to come up with some meaning. What is the meaning that you can impugn to this experience? And Viktor Frankl came up with a meaning for himself, and his meaning that he decided on, since he was a psychiatrist, to help the other captives there with overcoming their depression through his therapy called logotherapy, which is giving meaning to your life and to your circumstances. So he was an exceptional person, obviously, in that worst case scenario. But since we're not in those worst case scenarios usually, we can use the same principle, give our life meaning, change your thinking about your situation if you're disturbing yourself. And certainly these other captives in the concentration camps, where many of them were disturbing themselves emotionally about it, and he didn't set them free of their imprisonment, but he set them free of their emotional disturbance about it. So that's a very good book. I highly recommend it. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Frankl.
I mean, I know I've heard you say this, and I've agreed with you for, I don't know, since I first heard you say it. And even before then, just reading and learning from the Stoics that, we choose how we feel and we have agency to control it. But putting it in the terms that you just put it in, a Jew in a concentration camp, disturbing themselves was the word that you used. Like, I think most people their eyebrows are going to go up and be like, what do you mean they're disturbing themselves? Maybe it's the Nazis.
But it's
what do you say to that?
That causes you to disturb. Yeah,
but again, can you talk through that? Yeah.
This is that principle. It's always your thinking. Look to the thinking. You're not a helpless victim of your emotions. You're a helpless victim of the state, but to a large extent. But you're not a helpless victim of your emotions because you create your emotions. No one else does, so you can uncreate.
Yeah. Okay. So some people I think are misunderstanding. You have control over your emotions. You can decide if you're angry or upset or depressed. You can decide that. And
you can decide if that's working for you also.
Somebody says, yeah, that's a good point. Somebody said they didn't put themselves in that situation. A tyrannical dictator did. Yeah. And somebody said they could have fought. They could have. That's true. And I don't think Edelstein here is saying that you shouldn't fight back when it makes good sense to do that. Like if you have the capacity to defend yourself and the means to do so or whatever. I think correct me if I'm wrong. You're making an emotional argument that you should keep a calm, level head and make sure that you are choosing your emotions and not the other way around. Because if your emotions
I don't have a should in there. You snuck the should in there, Patrick. Ooh. I'm not saying you should control your emotions. I'm saying you can if you decide to. If you decide it's justified to rant and rage against the state, that's up to you. You can choose to do that. But if you choose not to do that, that's where my approach, rational emotive behavior therapy, comes in.
Why no should? I'm curious. Why no should? Why don't you say should?
Where does it get you?
More agency over your mental state, right? If you're in control of your emotions.
Less agency over your emotional state, because then you're upsetting yourself, and you don't want to do that, I'm sure.
No, I meant
you said agency.
You said I snuck should in, like when we said you should control your emotional state. Wouldn't that give you more agency?
Oh, well, actually, that's a good point. I'm glad you raised that, Patrick. It depends on what you mean by should. If you mean an absolutistic, psychopathological should that leads to disturbance, then it doesn't give you more agency, as I outlined. But if by should you mean it would be better, or it's a preferable should, not an absolute should, then that would be okay.
Yeah, the second one, the probably more layman should. It was probably what I was going for.
A layman should, by a layman who's not disturbing themselves.
Phobes says no. Your brain and the concoction of chemicals that exist in your brain control your emotions. What say you?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. That certainly influences your emotions. Your genetic predisposition influences your emotions. Your upbringing influences your emotions. The situation you find yourself in now influences your emotions. But those are influencers. They don't control your emotions. What immediately controls your emotions is your thinking, and that's something you can change if you want to.
Okay. All right. Last call for questions. It makes sense to me. I've been practicing, attempting to maintain control of my helm emotionally for, I don't know, the past maybe 8 years. And it's been almost nothing but positive changes in my life.
Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Glad to hear that.
Just having that mental separation from what's happening to me and my reaction to what's happening to me is one of the most empowering things that I've ever discovered. And I discovered this by reading the Stoics.
Right.
It's almost like you begin to pilot life, almost like, how do I describe this without making it cartoony? Like a video game. You're playing a character in a video game, but not that stupid. But when things happen to you or around you, you can experience them from a driver's seat rather than being in the middle of it. And so something happens and something in your brain is able to step in and be like, okay, well, this is happening. Let's talk about or think about what we should do in response before just acting, just acting rawly, I guess.
Yeah, I love that analogy. You're in the driver's seat and the car is your emotions, but you're driving it.
And it does highlight the moments where that breaks down and I lose my driver's seat. I mean, it still happens. I guess it happens to everybody. Like, I don't think anybody's ever going to be perfect in this regard or some sort of archon of stoicism. But yeah,
exactly.
I definitely lose it.
Marcus Aurelius got upset at times.
I mean, yeah, I definitely have lost it. But you know what? Like, I lose it so infrequently now that I can usually count the number of times in a year where I actually sort of lose it. It's like, and every year I'm like, well, last year was probably about, this number. And this year I want to try and improve that. Like, let's analyze what happens and get more in control. Life sucks, man. Life throws everything it possibly can at you. And if you do anything other than expecting that to happen, you're in for hurt. You're in for a world of hurt. It sucks.
Yeah, and also, I think that's a great way to avoid a world of hurt in regarding life. And also in regarding other people, I think the best stance is people are very imperfect. People have emotional problems. People are ignorant. People are stupid. So expect them to be that way. That's the way they are. And you won't upset yourself.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if you have any closing thoughts, I'll let you have the last word. Is there anything else that you think is important that people know or think about in regards to suicide that we haven't already kind of discussed?
Not that we haven't. I think we hit on the main principles. Also, I wanted to mention, as you did at the beginning of the program, that I have a weekly podcast called 3 Minute Therapy Podcast. It's a YouTube channel. And if any of you viewers would like to come on the podcast and discuss your disagreements or your problems on the podcast, I'm happy to help you with my partner, Mick Berry, who's on with me. And I have a Psychology Today blog. And I have 4 books. The most popular is 3 Minute Therapy, and a website, 3minutetherapy.com, and an international therapy practice by Zoom, FaceTime, phone, Skype. So I'm happy to work with you in my practice. Or if you just have questions about my practice, give me a call, send me an email, and you can get that information on my website, 3minutetherapy.com. And I'm happy to speak with you to see if we'd be a good fit.
Phobes vehemently disagrees with you. So I am, I would be happy to moderate a discussion between you two if you would be interested in it.
I'm interested.
Okay, maybe we can set that up, and of course, you can stream it to your channel as well. We can do it to both channels at the same time if you'd like. And we can bring your partner on as well and have a big discussion.
Okay, that would be great.
All right. Well, I'll reach out and be in touch, guys.
Thank you.
Hopefully you, hopefully you got something out of this conversation. I know I did. It's good to have this reminder that we're in control. We have agency over ourselves and our brains and our emotions. And it's easy to forget that because everybody talks about this stuff. Their language self-programs themselves into not having agency over their self-mind state.
You bet. Exactly.
It's good to have this. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, self-programs themselves and then reinforces it again and again and again and again. The bad programming.
Yeah, and my entire children's life, they're growing up quick, but I have never ever said, "How did that make you feel?" I've never said, "You're making your sister angry." I've never used that language that implies there's a causality from one person onto another. I've always said, well, you're choosing to feel angry when your brother nags you. You could choose to not feel angry and ignore them. And I think there's a lot of power and agency in that. It's really putting it. Yeah. And it resolves conflicts too. It's the last thing I'll say. There's another tangent, right? But there's people in the neighborhood. There's other parents, obviously. My kids occasionally cuss, and it's their mouth and their body, and they suffer the consequences when they make decisions with the language they use. And so there's a family up the street that very much does not appreciate certain language, and they get angry, and my kids come home.
They make themselves angry.
Yes, and my kids come home and they said they chose to be angry over what I said.
Oh, isn't that fabulous?
It is absolutely fabulous. But that still doesn't preclude the conversation of, well, are you going to affect, how is that going to affect your future choices and your future behavior if you want to continue going over there, that kind of stuff.
Very good.
It's really good to have the agency where it belongs in all things in life, know thyself.
Yes. Wonderful.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. I very much appreciate it. Thanks everybody in the comments for participating in the conversation. I hope you got something out of this. Until next time.
Thank you so much, Patrick.